Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and challenge you to start, finish, or publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark State. And as always, a huge thank you to our Bestseller Academates and patrons on Patreon. These are the people who support us and keep this podcast on the road. If you want to find out more about the Academy, and you get me and Mr. D's, your personal coaches, and all that wonderful stuff, a great writing community, courses, all that groovy stuff, go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. If you want to become a patron and get access to over 120 deep dives, you get them in the Academy too, by the way, pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And if you become a chart topper supporter, then you get access to those deep dives. And a big thank you to a couple of new patrons this week. Budge up at the back of the bus, everyone. Make room, please, for Irene Hogarth and Jennifer Riddles. Irene, Jennifer, thank you so much for your support. You are absolute champions. To support the podcast, just check out the links in the show notes. Mr. D, how are you today?
I am doing great. We've got snow in Canada, Mr. Stay. You can see it out the window. For anyone looking on YouTube, the snow has fallen. And I love snow as a kid. You know, that snow, it's like that magical white stuff. You wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, wow, no school today. But, you know, when you live in Canada, people get quite grumpy about snow. It's like, imagine, yeah. In some parts of Canada, they have snow for like 5 months of the year. And they're like,
serious snow there, yeah. Not like the snow we got here, yeah.
The amount of people I know who've done their back in shoveling snow, like you would not believe. And it's so, yeah. So I'm hanging in there. I'm still the Brit in the magic of the snow of Canada.
Well, in the UK, we've got grey. Is that a thing? We've got
totally. Grey. That's UK weather. It's grey or cloudy on a good day, right?
Yeah. Lots of grey. Oh,
but what isn't grey is a very special week that you've had, Mr. Stay. You've had a big week, haven't you?
Oh, I'm an old man. I've turned 50. I'm officially 50-area or whatever. Yeah.
Happy birthday, sir. How does it feel?
I'm invigorated. I'm just getting started. I mean, the last time I looked in the mirror, I felt about 32. So it's, you know, and I know people have asked about this. I am still meditating. You know, I'm doing it. I'm doing just little bits every day. It's very chill, usually mid-afternoon, just when everything is getting a bit too much, you know.
Yeah, that's a good time to do it.
You know, it's all groovy, baby. Yeah, it's all right.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. And, it's kind of mad, isn't it? Like decade birthdays. Everyone's had them. At least if you're over 10 and listening to this show, you've had one. And I flip-flop with decades. It's weird. Like I mourned my 30, like turning 30.
30 was hard. 30 is the hardest.
What is it about? Like you don't know that when you're a teen, but when you hit 30, you kind of like the 20s is like that magical period in your life where you're just like, you know, you've got a lot of people have like, you know, no kids, no mortgage, none of the kind of the things that kind of tie us down in life. And yeah, I struggled with 30.
30, you start thinking I should have done something by now.
Yeah.
You know,
why am I further along?
I should have achieved something. And I remember saying that to Claire, and she said, well, you're happily married with 2 kids. I said, apart from that.
Yeah. Of course, it goes without saying.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, yes.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And then 40s was like, I found that was a good one. And then 50s for me, because I turned 50 just a little bit before you, Miss Stake. Just very quiet, didn't I? Yeah. But 50s. Okay, leading up to 50s, it was like, I can't quite get my head around it. It just like, because when you're younger and you think of someone turning 50, you think, that's really old, like that. But what I thought of the way that I flipped my entire being around it is I was thinking, you know what? How about taking the angle of just being so grateful to have had those 50 years? And it's like, if you come from that perspective, it's like everything else is a bonus. And then I started thinking, it's great. I'm loving it. And literally within, I think it was on my birthday, it was leading up to it. I was like a bit kind of like, ooh. And a lot of our friends in the same school year as us checked in with them when a lot of them have been turning that decade birthday. And a lot of them just don't want to talk about it. They're like, yeah, better left said, you know, it's just,
I love it, mate.
They're shoving it down. So I love the fact that you're embracing it. And it's a good check-in in life, isn't it?
Yeah, no, like I said, I feel like I'm just getting started. The other thing is 50 isn't really old anymore.
It isn't.
I
Everyone
reckon
says, right?
we're eating better. You know, I put it down to the fact that they stopped putting lead in petrol when we were kids. Right, because when growing up, if you saw like an actor or a rock star in their 50s, they all look like Keith Richards or Zelda from the Terrorhawks, you know. Whereas now we're fairly smooth, you know.
Fountains
we moisturise,
of youth, aren't we?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
It's all that
because they stopped putting lead in the petrol. Yeah,
but do you know it is interesting? My gran, who is an amazing woman, crazy story. She gave birth to my mum when she was on the run from the Russians.
Wow.
In 1945. She was fleeing Prussia and she was in bomb shelters and she was carrying my mum. So I'm kind of like a kind of a knock-on effect, if you like, from someone that survived that, which is incredible. Yeah. And it really, like with everything happening in the world right now, that really like hits home for me. But my gran, she turned 101 on Friday last week. 101! Wow. So happy birthday, Ormy, in Germany. I know you don't listen to this podcast because you don't know what a podcast is, bless her. But she's living that lovely life of, you know, she doesn't have all of the trouble with computers and blue screens and phones running out of batteries. She's just like, you know, isn't that amazing? 101. And what an accomplishment that is. I think that's even more impressive than turning 100. Like, obviously, but when you think about it, we make such a big deal about turning 100. But there was another lady I knew locally. She died just recently before her 109th birthday. And I remember having a conversation with her when she was about 107. And I said to her, what's the secret to life? What's the elixir? Like, how have you, because she looks like she was, I'm not kidding you, she looked like she was about 80 when she was 109. Unbelievable. And I said, what are the three things that you would share with me as the elixir to like a long life?
Classic DeVoe question.
Classic DeVoe question. Yeah, I'm there with my notebook, right? I'm going to share this with the world. I'm going to get this information. And she had three things. You never guess what they are. Well, you probably guessed two of them. The first thing was walk every day.
Right.
She said, laugh a lot. And the third thing she said was oatmeal for breakfast every morning. I was like, okay, I'll make a note of that. So I started eating oatmeal. But do you know what the thing was? Is I looked at her and she was radiating life, even in her final years. She was joyful. She didn't look like she had aged to 109. Like she looked, like I say, she looked about 30 years younger. And she always had this lightness about her. She always had this lovely smile. And she just embraced life. And I think that's the secret. I think if we can kind of let go of so much of the crap that honestly is not that important, it really isn't. I mean, as we talked, my dad passed away recently. I sat with him on his deathbed and I was thinking about all of the things that we worry about. And it's like, it's not important. So much of it. Some of it is really important. And some of it is very serious. But honestly, about 95% of it, we can just let go of it. It's like we will not worry about it in next week, let alone in 5 years from now.
And it is absolutely true. And I think that kind of positive outlook in life. I've known elderly people who couldn't wait to die, you know, and were just so miserable about it.
Oh, but it's so sad. And I can understand that though as well, because it some people can, you know, it can be a real challenge and a struggle. But but it's I'd love. Yeah. I think we make a choice when we get to about
50.
maybe this is our moment, Mark. Maybe this is our moment. Maybe we should just. I'm desperately thinking in the back of my mind, how do we tie this into writers? But I think this is all very relevant.
No, I think it's all
relevant.
It is a truism that the older you get, the less of a crap you give about other people's the things you thought that were important that you worried about in your 20s and 30s. What other people thought of me, that kind of thing. You don't care about that anymore. You really don't
let go of stuff,
and you start living fearlessly, a bit more fearlessly, and it's absolutely true.
And
from
more
about mid-40s onwards.
When you let go of stuff, you're actually allowing yourself to let go of the burdens of some of the things you're dragging along in your kind of like backpack of life that you're having to like. And for me, it's about letting go, simplifying as much as you can. I'm big into simplification right now. God, that's a huge thing for me. But also. Yeah, I think there's and I mean, writing about the struggles is a great way to let go of them. We've talked about this in the academy so often about when people come up with like, I'm really struggling with my writing right now. All these things are happening in my life. And I keep saying, great, write about them. Write about them, acknowledge them, put them on paper, see them for what they are, allow yourself to start letting go. Sometimes you can't just drop things. Sometimes it's about a transition from place A to place B. But I do think I think that is why we keep showing up each week, is because we understand the value of how writing can play such a major role in the big thing that we've just been talking about, which is the big picture of life. And who knew, folks, when you were tuning into today's podcast, that Mark and I were going to go into existentialism, and
we didn't. We don't script into this, do we?
We don't, and that's what I love about it. And then I think, and it's super important. It really is important, and I really hope that if you're listening to this right now and you've had a crap day, you've having a crap week, maybe 2023 has been an absolute nightmare for you, or maybe you're having a lovely time and you're really happy about things, you're looking around saying, why is everyone so sad and miserable? Wherever you're at in life, I hope something that we just said brightens you up or makes you see the world slightly differently or makes you think of things in a different way, because we don't talk about this enough. And this, honestly, Mark, this is my jam. I love to go deep on this stuff. I love to talk about it because I think we discover so much. I mean, you've kind of opened the door now, Mark. Now you're saying you're starting to meditate. I mean, God knows you're unleashing the Kraken in me. I'm going to be like, wow, let's go full on this. But I think it's about being open to exploring what life really is about. And as a writer, it's about understanding about how your writing really ties into that in such a core and important way. And so, yeah, I think it's just important to just be open to that and run with it. And if we can all be a little bit lighter and a little bit happier, we might all end up living a lovely life and dying at 109 with a smile on our face, right? I mean, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want that?
It's the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How many? Okay, new calculation. Like I always talk about 4,000 Saturdays and the average number of books you can write in a lifetime. But that's based on an average age of about 79 years, which is the average lifespan of someone in the world. When you take all cultures and nations. If I had to recalculate how many books you could write in 109 years. In fact, okay, has anyone ever written a book who's over 100 years of age? And if they have, and if you're alive and you can tell us, or if it was your grandparent, or if it was I want to hear about people that wrote books in a very, very kind of like in their very last decades of their life, but really, people that really made it a long way. I'd love to hear about what they wrote about and if it ever got published. What's the book that's been written by the oldest person ever alive? I don't know the answer to that question, but it must be out there somewhere.
Yeah, I was chatting to someone at the RNA Awards who was well into her 80s, and she felt she was just getting started. So
yeah, and there's a lot of people that get started in their 80s. And another question: do we have someone in their 90s who's just starting writing? Has someone discovered this podcast like in their 80s and 90s and been inspired to write? We want to hear from you. Tell us about what you're up to. That'd be really fascinating as well. And because you would totally inspire everyone out there. All those people who are saying, oh, I'm 50 or I'm 40 or I'm starting too late, I'm 60, it's too late to start a new career or a new hobby. There's someone out there who's probably writing in their hundreds right now. Brings a whole new meaning to the 200-word challenge, right? Anyway, let's dive in because we've got a humdinger of an interview today. Like firstly, let's say it's so lovely to have a children's author on the show. We've had a number of children's authors, but there's a lot to be learned, even if you're not a children's author from this interview, isn't there, Mark? Tell us about our guest this week.
Yes, Matt. Talk about feeling young and feeling used. Matt describes it as arrested development, which I feel like I have myself. But Matt Brown is the author of such wonderful children's books as the Compton Valance series, which is about a boy who creates a time machine from a 13-week-old mouldy sandwich. He also writes the Dreary Inkling School books, and he's done The Mab, which is a retelling of the Mabinogi, which might be one of the oldest written stories in the history of Britain. Matt was also a TV presenter, notably on Nickelodeon, and he's a podcaster, but don't hold that against him. We discuss the worst rejections you've ever heard, how he works with illustrators and editors, the influence of TV comedy on his writing, and farts. Farts, for some reason, come up a lot in this conversation, which will probably tells you all you need to know about myself and Matt. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So hold your noses, folks, and enjoy this incredible interview with the absolutely lovely Matt Brown.
Matt Brown, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm really well. I've just had some porridge. I've got a coffee on the go. And all is sun shining. All is well with the world.
Very, very. And I see that you were recently voted the greatest writer ever in the history of the world by Stockport Grammar School, knocking Shakespeare into second place. That must have been quite a day.
It was. I mean, we all saw it coming, I think. It's just funny. I love telling that when I go into schools. I tell to incredulous teachers and kids that I've been voted the greatest writer in the history of the English language.
Fantastic. It's good. It looks very good on the CV, I've got to say. I'd love to talk about the books and the wonderful books and series that you've got out there, and then go back to sort of where it all started. Yeah. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you a very unfair question, which you're under no obligation to answer. But let's start with...
Yes, we should have a general election.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Was that it? Was that the question?
Let's start with Compton Valance, which is about a kid with a time-traveling sandwich, which, as I understand it, was an idea that you were convinced had been done before, which made me think, you know how Paul McCartney, the yesterday just arrived and he was convinced that someone had written it already? Was it like that?
Well, I mean...
Are you bigger than the Beatles as well as better than Shakespeare?
I'm thrilled with the comparison to yesterday. I think that in terms of my writing life, there have been... So far, I've had 8 books published. I've got 3 more coming out in the next couple of years. So a total of about 11 or 12 books. And 2 of them have been really easy to write. They've just sort of like come out. And the first Compton Valance was one of those. And I sort of take that to be, I don't know if it is a sign of you're on the right tracks or not with a story, when it just sort of just tumbles out of you. And I think that because I'd been trying to be published for, 15 previously, been writing stories and sending them out and being knocked back. And it'd always been a bit of a struggle. It'd always been quite hard to make the story work and to make plot lines fit together and to kind of get characters to really sort of work hard for you. And that story, the first Compton Valance story, as you said, about a boy who accidentally creates a time machine out of a sandwich, it just was all there. And so I think I was so suspicious of that I just automatically assumed that that I must have in some way stolen it from somebody. But I think where it had come from was just a love of sci-fi stories all my life. And particularly, I was a big fan of that sort of subgenre of time travel stories.
Excellent stuff. Had you been, the stuff that you've been writing and that hadn't quite been working, was that very much in the same vein, or had you been writing for older children or younger children or adult stuff? What sort of stuff were you writing before Compton Valance?
It was always kid stuff. And it was pretty much sci-fi, fantasy sort of in that sort of world. The first thing that I wrote and sent off to a publisher, I didn't even go for an agent, was a more serious story. My stories are sort of, funny stories that have been published. And that was a more sort of serious story, still for that sort of age group, sort of 7 to 10 year olds. And it was about aliens. And I got the feedback I got from the publisher was that it was the worst thing they'd ever read.
You're kidding? They actually said that.
They did, and I think that I'd sent it via a friend of mine or somebody I worked with knew that I was writing a story and said, "Oh, I know a publisher. Why don't I'm very happy to sort of pass it on." And so I said, "Yeah, great." So it wasn't even a full story, it was sort of like about 6-7 chapters of it. And then so this intermediary then said, "Yeah, I've had some feedback," and then just sent me the email that they sent. So I don't know if it had ever been intended for me to read it.
I don't think so.
but also the person who had sent it, the publisher, the person who worked in the publishing team, was quite a junior person, and it almost felt like they were cutting their teeth a bit, you know, and
Right, yeah.
had to have a really strong opinion about something. And I
Mm.
don't think, I mean, I certainly think with all the editors that I've worked with subsequently, having been published now, nobody would ever say something like that.
No.
Just on the basis that I think that there's that technique in improvisation, which is called yes and, which is where you're never allowed to say no to something or shut something down. You've always got to kind of expand on it and see where it goes. And I think that the editors are much more like that now, and agents are much more like that. So I think I received that bit of advice. Probably not meant to, or probably wasn't meant to see it. But in actual fact, I printed it out and stuck it on my wall for many years, and it provided me with inspiration. And I think that again, it feels like if you are you're a writer, but you haven't been published and you want to be published, you do have to have a bit of that. Screw you sort of attitude, and I don't care what you say. I'm just going to keep on writing the stuff, and it will always get better, because the more you do something, the better it gets.
I think you're absolutely right. The number of authors we've had on here who've been spurred on by the words "I'll show you" while waving an angry fist is
exactly.
is.
I mean, we've all got. I've still got all my rejection letters, and looking back at them, it's interesting to see how there are you get lots of rejection letters which are, we don't have a space on our books for you at this time. Thank you for your interest. Sort of 2 lines. Yeah. But I did receive quite a few who were very kind, and who were saying, look, this isn't quite right at the moment, but it's obvious that you enjoy it, and it's obviously that there's something there. So please keep writing and keep sending us stuff, because we think that we think that it will happen for you. And I think that I think rejection letters, sometimes there are rejection letters and there are rejection letters.
Yeah, that's very good point indeed. With the Compton Valance books, which I downloaded an ebook of them, and by the way, the ebooks, folks, come with sound effects, which is brilliant. And I was looking, and the layout of them is amazing. And you've got caps and speech bubbles and text all over the page, and you're working with the illustrator Lizzie Finley. I'd love to know how that working relationship has evolved, because maybe with your first book you just wrote the text and the images were interpolated, and as you've gone on, has that developed? Tell us how that worked.
Well, I mean, it's always the same process, really, and I'd say that this is where, it takes a village to make a book would come into it, because essentially I write the text, I send it off, we work on that until we're happy with it, and then that text gets sent to the designers first,
right? Who
then sort of lay it out on the page how they want it to, and then they send it to the illustrator with ideas for which bits they want illustrated and where on the page they want it to be illustrated. So the idea of the layout for Compton Valance, which, as you say, is sort of it's I think it's a really lovely read for a kid, because it's all sort of jumbly, and you've got a kind of words sort of like spiral on the page, and the illustrations is really interwoven with the words. That really, it was down to the editor for that book, who had that vision. And that's what she wanted to do. And when she sort of showed it to me, I really loved it, and sort of, and gave it my blessing, really. Mm-hmm. And then what then happens is that when the sort of draft illustrations come back, I've got some license to say, actually, that's not what I thought they would look like, or maybe you could do this, or I don't like that drawing. But by and large, that's probably about 10% of the drawings kind of fall under that. The rest of it is just, I'm always just blown away by the illustrators that I work with. So Lizzie on the Compton series, and the other illustrator for my Dreary Inkling series, Paco Sordo. I just enjoy working with them. I think simply because I've got such a limited visual range, and so it's lovely to be able to work with somebody who obviously doesn't. And I'm really excited. But just speaking about, illustration is such a big part of the books that I do. And I've got a series coming out in September this year, brand new series, brand new characters. And the illustrator is Flavia Sorrentino, who most recently, to my knowledge, or the thing that I knew her from was P.G. Bell's The Great Brain Robbery books. Right. And she's brilliant. So it's really nice to be able to work with someone who is visual, because I am so unvisual, I think, in the way that I work.
So when you're writing your drafts, even now when you're a few books into both series, you're not putting things in the comments saying, okay, I'd like this to look like a snake, or let's have an explosion here, or can we have... You're just concentrating solely on the text.
Solely on the text, yeah. And it's funny because my editor for this latest book series that's coming out, which is called Kevin the Vampire, by the way, is... she said that to me, and I'd never thought about it before. She'd said, because there was a little situation that I thought it'd be nice if we could have a clue in the illustration that I wouldn't give in the text. And she said, "Oh, just write that. Just put it in brackets." And I thought, oh, yeah, how come it's taken me 10 years to be able to work that out?
One thing I noticed about the Dreary Inkling books, there's more text. It's a bit less hyperactive than the Compton Valance books. Was that a deliberate choice to calm things down, to sort of experiment a bit more with concentrate more on the story? Or
yeah, I think so. It's funny. You want your books to be accessible to everybody, and you realise that in order to do that, you have to make choices. And I'd never really thought that before. About stories and about illustrations and about the design of the book. For the Compton books, we got a lot of people saying that, particularly readers who had forms of dyslexia, some found it difficult, some found it made it easier to read. But I think that there was a sort of a sense that we wanted to make it as easy as possible for everybody, for as many people as possible to read. Mm-hmm. And so the font, they sort of tested the font out. It's a slightly different, I don't know what the font is, but it's a slightly different font. And there is more text on the page probably, but still not a lot. And I think that, and also I wonder as well, I mean, I have had this problem more recently with, and it sounds like something so stupid, but the price of paper has skyrocketed recently. So we've just done an edit, a sort of an unscheduled edit on this new book, because the price of paper is so high. We needed to cut about 2,000 words out of the story.
Really?
And that's simply because foreign markets were saying, we love the book, but there's just too many pages at the moment. So it's prohibitive. It would be prohibitively expensive for us to do foreign editions of it. And so I wonder whether things like that I didn't know at the time may have had an impact on the design of a story or the illustrations that they use.
Wow, that's really, because I know paper prices and card is going up and it's becoming more expensive. But then I've got lots of friends who are fantasy authors who will happily write a 200,000 word fantasy epic, but then it will cost £20 plus for a hardcover of that, So
yeah, and I suppose that's the benefit of e-publishing, is that you don't have to worry about that at all. And I'm sure that lots of fantasy readers read on ebooks in a way that it's not really a big thing for kids. So books are still the way that they get their stories.
Very much so. And do you have an idea of the kind of balance of your readers? Are there more boys than girls? And what sort of child do you have in mind when you're writing your books?
That is, a question that I can't really give you an answer. I don't think.
Fair enough.
I mean, but I don't know. I mean, do you have a person in mind when you write your stories?
It's usually me.
I suppose I think that's the same. It's the same. I think if you're pleasing yourself, then you sort of hope that somebody else will like it. The thing about boys versus girls on the stories is it's so weird that the whole industry, I think, and by industry I mean like educators, parents as well, I sort of like lump into this, is that there's an obsession with writing stories for boys or writing stories for girls.
Yeah.
And it really infuriates me, because I think that, and so when I'm asked, would it be good for boys? I say it's like, it's good for someone who finds things funny. who wants to read a funny story. That's who it's good for, because it feels like that there isn't there. Yeah, it feels like that it's not really one or the other. I don't think that that girls laugh any less about a funny situation than boys would, or would find it something more or less scary or interesting. I suppose.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a fear that and I had this with my son when he was a teenager, that you lose them to gaming. The boys tend to,
for sure.
When my son was a teenager, he was playing Grand Theft Auto. That's what a brilliant parent I am.
No, it's great. It's a great game.
And I was like, come on, George, read a book. And I said, books, they're full of sex and violence. Read them. Here's some Stephen King, Weirdly, it was Asterix and Tintin in the end that saved
him.
Yeah, but it's I think it's a fear among parents. And also, we're talking sweeping generalizations here, which is probably never a good thing when you're talking about gender. But you do find that publishing is, certainly children's publishing, most of the editors are women. There are very few blokes as commissioning editors who, women are brilliant editors, but they were never an 8-year-old boy picking their nose and farting and having those.
But I wonder that I'm sure they were picking their nose and farting. I'm almost certain they were doing those things. But I think as well that children's publishing, I guess more than adult publishing, seems obsessed with putting kids in boxes.
Yes. Yeah.
If you go into a bookstore, it's you've got your shelf for 5 to 7s and your shelf for 8 to 12s and your shelf for YAs and your shelf for picture books. And I do wonder what would happen if you just organized books by genre rather than the age group.
I think that comes from the curriculum, where they're obsessed with reading ages and the Oxford Reading Tree and stuff like that. And yeah.
And as you've got kids yourself, you realise that. I mean, so the books I write for the category, I think, is 7 to 11, and the difference in people age 7 to age 11 is extraordinary.
Vast,
I mean, it's like a sort of 20-year-old and an 80-year-old sort of variation. And also, there are kids who are much better readers or more confident readers. Sorry, that's not fair. More confident readers than other kids. Kids who find reading difficult for whatever reason, or kids who are much more interested in pictures or graphics than they are sort of the words. And so it's so broad that I think that it's almost useless.
I think you're right. Let's go back to where it all started, because you and I have something in common, which is we both pinch jokes from Blackadder and Ben Elton to make people laugh at school. Tell us about that.
Well, I suppose I just always loved television. I think that and when I'm in schools and kids say, if you always enjoyed reading stories. I mean, the honest answer is that when I was sort of a preteen, that I sort of I did read some books, but really I was into TV. That was where and comics. And those were the things that I loved to read. And those were the things where I sort of got my stories from. So I do always say to parents or teachers, I think as long as a kid likes a story, it doesn't really matter how they get it. Could be, I mean, a video game is a story as far as I'm concerned. So it doesn't bother me too much that my kids are just obsessed with video games. So I love TV and I love TV comedy. And I was just a kid. I was like 9 or 10. I was in primary school when I first saw The Young Ones, which sort of blew my brain out. And it was one of those, I think, that because it's so cartoony, that show, that I was able to be watched by quite a broad range of people. Certainly at 9, I wasn't getting the sort of overt, sort of political sort of comedy that was going on. But it meant that it was just sort of gateway into that sort of stuff, and particularly Ben Elton, I suppose, was someone who I loved, and Rick Mayall was the sort of hero of mine. And even now, I mean, in the stories, I find increasingly that I've always got in my stories an old woman. And the old woman, whenever I sometimes do the audiobooks for mine, and they always sound like Rick Mayall doing George's Marvelous Medicine from Jack and Ori when I do them. So I think those things are so sort of vital to your creative life, those experiences when you're in your, sort of preteen and early teens. And I still love using them. And I'm sure you can recite entire episodes.
Absolutely.
The Young Ones and Blackadder, even though I've not watched them for 30 years.
Yeah. No,
absolutely.
I mean, the young ones, you were talking about comic books as well. I mean, the Young Ones is almost like the Bash Street Kids go to university.
Yeah, it is.
It has that anarchic comic strip kind of energy to it, which when you're a kid, it's great because they're smashing stuff, they're farting, there's talked a lot about farting this episode, so it has that kind of
normal human function.
Exactly, yes. It has that kind of comic strip behavior, and you're right, it's only when you come back to it as an adult you think this was really, really very political as well.
Yeah. It was, and so some of the stuff that so I used to watch it with my parents because they found it hilarious, and I found it hilarious, but for completely different reasons. And it's I suppose it's that thing of that they often talk about The Simpsons in that way, don't they? As being something that can work on for two different audiences at the same time. And I sort of like to think that in a funny way, my books do that. I often imagine the parent reading them, and they will get the sort of there'll be some subtlety sort of jokes in there, along with the sort of more broad brushstroke stuff that I hope that they get something out of it as well.
Absolutely. I think, as a parent who spent every night reading to one child or the other, you had your own favorite books, the ones that you could. Yeah. And I remember the Horrid Henry books. I mean, I worked at Orion and we sold the Horrid Henry books, and there were some lovely little gags for grown-ups in those as well that worked really, really well.
Yeah.
How aware are you of that? I mean, we're talking about you're writing for yourself to please yourself, but how aware are you of the parent as perhaps the conduit for your stories?
Yeah, I mean, not too much. I try not to think too hard about that, and often I think in certainly the first draft, I go slightly over the top in terms of the jokes being a bit near the knuckle.
Right.
And knowing that they might get, or I've learned that if you chuck enough stuff at something, then some of it will get through.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So you can, and there'll be battles to be fought with your editors about a certain joke, but you can kind of like say, okay, have that one, take that one out, but leave that one in.
Yeah.
And there's it's really fun. I think about this a lot. There's a book that I wrote called Aliens Invaded My Talent Show, which is about a group of school kids whose talent show in their school is sort of ruined by some aliens who are visiting. And there was a joke at the beginning where I'm setting the scene about this character called Eric. Eric Doomsday is his name. And I wanted him, he's not a popular kid in the school, and he's a bit alone. And in the beginning, I sort of try and demonstrate this by saying that he's never had any post. He never gets any post. And I can remember that being a big thing when I was a
really
kid.
Big thing.
Like adults get lots of post.
You never get any fun posts anymore. It's all bills.
No, it's all bills. But I just love the idea of getting post. And so Eric never gets any post. But then I say, but he did get something once that was it was sort of he accidentally opened something that was for his auntie, and he spent a terrible sort of 20 minutes thinking he was 6 months pregnant, and that joke made it through about 3 edits, and then somebody said, we think we should change it, and I was really sad about that. And so it then got watered down to a joke about having to go to the hospital to lance a boil or something like that.
Right.
And I thought, I was really, 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 really sad about some of the jokes that don't make it in.
That's a good gag.
I thought it was great.
I'm just trying to imagine the parent reading that.
Yeah,
because if it was me,
like that.
I would just crack up, and my son would be going, "What?
Yeah, exactly." And maybe that's because that was the reason it was taken out. Maybe because they thought it wouldn't make sense to a kid. I think that was the note, that it would sound a bit weird for a kid. Weird to a kid. I thought, that's a shame.
That is a shame. Because again, going back to the Young Ones, and I think Python did this as well, they would put in one massively outrageous joke that the censor would go, no, that's going.
Yeah.
In order for the joke they really wanted to go in to stay in.
Yeah.
That whole negotiation process.
Yeah, it is a bit like that.
Talking of TV, you worked as a presenter at Nickelodeon.
Yes.
Was that a great training ground for you in terms of getting into the mindset of what children like.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and it was quite inspirational, and it's remained a constant theme in my writing life for kids, because at Nickelodeon they very much had the mantra that they wanted it to be for kids. They didn't want it to be for adults. They wanted all the shows, and I was one of the sort of continuity presenters, introducing shows and back animating shows and that sort of thing. And again, the stuff that we used to do, it was like we would never think about what a parent would think. We would think about what a kid would think. And I thought that was really interesting. And also, it was fascinating to me when I thought about some like an organization like the BBC. And I am a humongous fan of the BBC. But I think that some of their kids programs, certainly when I was a kid, were definitely, made with what would the adult think in the room of this.
Yeah.
And so I think that has shaped my view on writing for kids, because I really try and write things that they will find funny, write stories that they will find scary or interesting, and not worry at all about what a parent might think, to the point that I mean, that you can just see when I'm reading in schools, the teachers sort of rolling their eyes at some of the stuff, and a lot of the stuff is scatological, or is sort of bodily functiony. But again, this I've got two sons, one 17, one 14. We're in the car this morning going to school, and my youngest son, he just sort of like wound the window down next to him. And I looked over at him, and he was just sort of looking all sort of like he wanted to laugh a lot, and that no words were spoken, but I knew exactly what he'd just done, and his reaction to it made me laugh. And I think that I know that sort of that sort of toilet humor is sort of looked down upon by lots of people, but
not me.
No, I just think there's so much of that, of like of being a person, of the sort of the nuts and bolts of being a person. And it doesn't have to be toilet based. It can be all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I think there's such a rich, funny ground, and makes me laugh so much when it happens in my own life. And it's like people falling over, isn't it? Or it's sort of pricking the pomposity of the absurdity of us as humans.
Yes.
And trying to live within these weird rules that we've constructed, when in fact we're just sort of bags of farts and burps.
How do you because I know you've used your children as sounding boards for your work. You worked at Nickelodeon, but your children are getting older. Mine are in their 20s now. How do you remain in that mindset of children who are reading today? How do you kind of, without? Because I think one of the problems that a lot of, and I've heard this from editors, is that people in their 40s will try and write a children's book, and it'll be like the books they read when they were children, and they're not like the books that are being read today. I mean, obviously, you've got skin in the game, you're doing incredibly well, but how do you maintain knowing what those kids want?
I don't know is the answer. Other than that, I definitely have Arrested Development.
Right.
And that, my youngest son calls me a man-child. And which I sort of wear slightly as a badge of honor. And I think, and it's like, but when I'm at parties, if I go to a friend's and they're having a party, I really gravitate, and I want to chat to the kids. And it's sort of like the upper end. It's the kids I write for, I suppose. I don't know why that is, but they just always make me laugh. And there's such an uncynical sort of. It's such an uncynical age. It's such a lovely age, that sort of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old age, where just everything is possible. They're up for everything. They do the yes and all the time. You know what I mean? They're just, I find it incredibly sort of revitalizing whenever I'm sort of in their company. And I suppose that and maybe it's because I mean, who knows? But my parents divorced when I was 9, and I think, and there was definitely like a change in my life, obviously at that point where things got a bit real, maybe.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's something to do with that it's kind of like I see that sort of sort of 9-10-year-old as a sort of an idealized age. I also love I love listening to them because they say things that make me laugh. But also I was at a friend's house recently, and I was trying to think what the phrase was that this kid said. I mean, it was he was sort of bemoaning the fact that no one ever listens to him, that he's this sort of like the middle kid and no one listens to him. And he just said, "You always never tell me things." I thought I would never in a million years be able to write that, but I've obviously used it in a story because it's such a brilliant way of describing that frustration.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why I don't know why I still enjoy writing for that age group, but I really do. But and maybe it'll change. Maybe I'll start writing for for older. Now that my kids are older, maybe that'll be the catalyst to write for older kids or
Fantastic.
adults. I don't know.
Slight change of tack as well, in that you have this brilliant book, The Mab. Tell us about The Mab, which you've worked on with Eloise Williams.
That's right. Former Children's Laureate Wales, Eloise Williams. And it was a lockdown project, really.
Right.
It was, I grew up in South Wales, and we, as part of an English lesson one week, talked about the stories of the Mabinogi, which, for anyone who doesn't know, are sort of ancient British stories. We think that they're the oldest prose stories ever committed to print in the UK. So about 5 years ago, and they're full of things like magicians and dragons, and it's where King Arthur sort of makes his debut. And my son was sort of getting into things like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and things like that. And I thought, I'll get a copy for kids of these stories because he'll like them, and I'd like to read them again. And I thought I'd like to read a kid's version because that'll give me it's like reading a sort of like a primer, isn't it, on these stories? And as I'd looked, and there wasn't a copy. There wasn't a copy that had been written of all 11 stories for kids in English. And I remember thinking, that's a gap in the market. Somebody should do something about that. And then forgot about it until lockdown happened. And about 2 weeks in, I sort of was on a dog walk in that lovely sort of, sunny weather that we had with my wife. And I said, I think as it doesn't look like this is going to be going away. So I think I'm going to try and do this Mabinogi for kids. Got in touch with Eloise, who I knew through somebody, and asked her if she wanted to help me do it. She was really into it, and we decided we were going to crowdfund it, simply because no publisher wanted to touch it with a barge pole, frankly, for a variety of reasons. Probably lockdown was key amongst them, but also because it's an anthology. Publishers are very reluctant to publish anthologies unless you've got like a kind of superstar name involved, which we didn't. So we went to Unbound, who are a crowd funding publisher, and I knew them because I'd supported your book on there.
No.
I was trying to look for a copy of it, but I can't. I don't know what
It's probably propping up a table. Don't worry.
But I'd really like that, and somebody else had done it. And then I'd supported somebody else on it, and I just loved that idea. For anyone who hasn't seen Unbound, it's great. They produce really high quality, interesting projects. But the thing is, you get to kind of be part of the journey, and that was a lovely thing. You get to the authors update you on how it's going and what stage they're at, and all of that sort of stuff. And so we crowdfunded it, and the crowdfunding went really well, and it suddenly became a book that we had incredible amount of control over, in terms of who illustrated it, what it looked like, the design. We picked the font. The book was in we did everything. We got in touch with Michael Sheen through another friend, and he gave us a foreword for the book. And it was then published in July of last year, and it's going really well.
Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. I want to wind things up now. with a really unfair question.
Okay.
That you're under no obligation to answer. But this is just something I see with children's authors all the time, particularly children's authors in the UK. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you hate David Walliams?
I've got a slight, it's a slightly, not love-hate, but there's a duality. I do think that he has, he's kind of created a market that I benefit from.
Right.
But he does, and not just him, there are other sort of superstar names that suck a lot of the energy and the oxygen out of the space that I'm in, simply because I think what they do is so derivative. Mm-hmm. And there are some that I think are really good. For example, I really enjoyed The Parent Agency, David Baddiel's sort of debut book. Which seemed like that was really interesting, and it was a great idea, and he's an interesting writer, and I thought that worked really well. But I am a bit sick of seeing presenters, I say this having been a presenter myself, who write a story, but that is basically the thing they do on the telly,
right,
in a sort of children's book form. That I find quite irritating. And it's only really irritating because I don't think those books sell very well. And I think that the publishers are, I guess, just under incredible pressure to make targets and make some money. And they think that that's a good way of doing it. And I think that it's very difficult then for other people to get in bookshops. It makes it a very competitive, proposition.
I think it's. I mean, I worked for a publisher, and I worked for we sold Orion Children's for a while, and Horrid Henry was the big priority. So for us, getting Horrid Henry into supermarkets, into WH Smith's, where there's much less shelf space, it's very competitive. You pay a lot of money to get on those shelves as well. There's a great expense there, but as you say, for the casual, it tends to be the aunt or uncle who goes, "What shall I get the 7-year-old for Christmas in terms of books?" And it's just an easy thing to go, just give them that.
That's it.
Give them a David Walliams or whatever. Whereas, there's a lot more out there that people just don't know
Totally.
about.
I mean, I remember being in my local Waterstones, and there was two people, a mum and a kid, in the kids section, and I was sort of like watching them, like
taking notes.
Look at those books. Look at my books. Look for my books. And the kid was really enjoying his time, just sort of like picking books out, looking through them, and eventually the mum was obviously incredibly rushed and time pressure, and eventually she just pulled out, I forget if it was a David Walliams or a Roald Dahl or something, and said, "Look, we've heard of him. Let's take this book." And that's the book that they bought. And I imagine that must be the same up and down the country.
Yeah.
Also, as well, I mean, most people, I think, buy books through Sainsbury's or supermarkets, as you say. Yeah. And if you go into a supermarket, even the really big ones, the range of children's book they've got that they have is tiny, and it's like, and of the 100 books they've got, you're right, like 40 of them will be J.K. Rowling, 40 of them will be Roald Dahl and David Walliams and a couple of others, and I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's just worth, if you're a parent and you're listening to this, there are so many amazing children's authors out there who don't get the time or the recognition that a David Walliams or a J.K. Rowling or a Roald Dahl will get, but their books are just as good, if not better.
Very good answer. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Matt. Matt, thank you so much for speaking to me today. You mentioned Kevin the Vampire. When will we see Kevin the Vampire?
Kevin the Vampire is going to be released in September 2023. It's a story about a carnival of monsters. And Kevin is the son of the owners, who are vampires, and they travel to a town that hates fun things, and want to drive them away. So it's a really funny story, but it's been great because it's the first kind of complete world that I've ever created. Usually my sort of monsters inhabit the real world, but this is a completely new world. And I obviously think it's the best thing I've ever done, and would love it if people would go and buy it.
Fantastic. Can't wait. Maybe you can come back and talk to us about that at the time as well.
Would love to.
Brilliant. Matt, it's been an absolute joy and great to speak to you, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. So, Mark, before this interview, we were talking about people reaching a wonderful old age and the joys that they experienced in their later years. Matt absolutely, for me, sums up just an incredible person who's so young at heart, who still has that childlike magic and like badge of honor. You know, he talks about this badge of honor with his son being called, like a grown-up kid. And I think it feels like that's such an important element to have if you want to be a successful children's writer. You need to remember what it's like to be a kid and still embrace that inner child that we all have in us. And most of us like shut down because it's far too, silly to be like, childish or childlike in your older years, right?
I think it's absolutely essential. And you're right. So many of us get that knocked out of us, usually at school. You're told, grow up.
Yeah, well, what do
behave
you
yourself
hear?
and grow up,
or man up as guys, or you hear those man up, and you're like, whoa, hang on a minute, it's like,
So I think it is absolutely essential, and it's difficult to grasp it back once you've lost it as well. It's once you've done that growing up, once you've lost that instinct, because I don't know about you, but I remember in the playground there was this intense competition to be the funny one, and to be first with a gag.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Everyone I knew at school had a really, really sharp wit, really, really funny. And it's fascinating. I say a few years ago, it's about 10 years ago now. I went to a friend's wedding, and like Claire knew me and my friends, all my teenage friends, when we were teenagers. So she knew what we were like. But when we went to this friend's wedding, we reverted to being those 16, 17-year-olds again, with the fart jokes and all the rude stories and everything else. Yeah. And their wives were looking at us as if to say, who is this person? Who's this person I've married? What are you doing? Why are you behaving like this? And Claire would just say to them, no, this was what they were like when they were teenagers. So it's weird. It's still there. We can probably tap into it. I don't think it's ever too late. It's there. But if you want to write kids' books, it's essential. You've got to tap into that point of view.
I think it's very much like many things in life, and that is like using a gym analogy, or like, I don't know, doing press-ups. Like if you try and do a press-up after 10 years of not doing a press-up, it's like, oh my God, my body's not working. But if you stick with it and, you think, well, if just do one press-up a day, and then 2 weeks later, I feel like I can do 2 now. And then, a few months down the road, you might be able to push out 10 or 20 press-ups and then maintain that. I think it's something that we can, if we consciously want to get it back, I think we can allow ourselves to go back there. And I think one of the great things about becoming a new parent, so for all the new parents out there, that experience of being allowed to play with Lego again, that experience of being able to sit with your child and watch some old like TV show that you used to watch as a kid, stuff like that, it just helps loosen you up a bit. And but I would love to be able to, I'd love to hang on to that for the rest of my life. I'd love to hang on to the joy of, because children are just brilliant. They're just like, so they're just out there. Just, they say what they think. They have this incredible imagination where they can dream and be anything they want. And I'm thinking, God, if we could have a little bit of that and tap that in, drop that into us as adults about our writing.
I mean, it sort of taps into what we were saying earlier. I think I'm getting that back now.
Yes.
The no filter. One of the great joy, we had some people over at the weekend for my birthday and everything, and my great nephew came over and he's 5, and we were sitting doing Lego together, and it's just one of the great joy. The two of us just sitting doing it, and I had the instruction book and I was asking him to get pieces and what have you, and it was just that. There was no rush. There was no hurry. There was no thinking, oh, I've got to do this later. You were just in the moment.
I think that's what kids are. Yeah.
And it's not just about going back and remembering stuff that you enjoyed when you're younger. It's about remembering that point of view of being 2 foot shorter than everyone else. If you watch, Spielberg is good at this as well. You watch Spielberg's movies where there's a child protagonist, the camera is lower. So E.T., Close Encounters, whenever there's a child, the camera drops down here to this height. So you're seeing it from that child's perspective as well.
Wow.
It is, and Roald Dahl was very good at that as well. We're going to talk about him in the extended version. We're going to come back to that. He remembered what it was like to be a child and know that adults don't always have your best interests at heart.
Yeah. And also sometimes it's the adult that needs to learn from the child rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Right. And not that they're there to teach us something, tell us what to do, but it's by observing them and remembering. Because we all connect with that, I think, when we have children, if we've been fortunate enough to have kids, or unfortunate, depending on where you're at in the cycle. It's like you've got that ability to tap in every day and remind yourself when one of your kids just does a silly dance, in the kitchen or something ridiculous. It actually also taps into reminding us, yeah, I used to be like that. I used to do that. Oh my God, it's like, that's exactly what I was like growing up. And I really admire people who keep that kind of fun, aspect of parenting, and how you translate that into writing for children is you've got to start by just laughing with kids. I think you have to kind of get to their level, like you said, like the camera, get to their level and just have some fun with them.
Well, as Matt said, he said at parties or gatherings, he gravitates towards the kids because they're always more fun than the adult. Adults will be going on about their bloody pension or mortgage or whatever, or something in the news.
Yeah.
Where the kids were. We would go to. I remember we went to a wedding once and we were on that table that's right at the back by the toilets because we barely knew, who was getting married, but we were happy to be there. And George, he was about 8 at the time, was sat next to a guy and he discovered that he was a maths teacher. So George was just having this conversation about division and maths and stuff like that. And he would just in the moment, no filter, just having a completely open conversation. And that ability just to walk up to anyone and talk to them and have a chat and just ask them about who they are and where they are in and what they're interested in, and do you like this, and not afraid to ask questions as well. Because this Lego thing that I was making with my great nephew was a rabbit, and Lego do this thing where every year they bring out a little model based on the Chinese so they've had the year of the ox and the year, and this is the year of the rabbit. So and I was explaining, it's the year of the rabbit, that kind of thing. And he was looking at the other Lego models we've got on the shelf, and he said, so it's the year of the rabbit, year of the tiger, year of the witch. There was just a Lego model of a witch, and he said that, and it had never occurred to me before, and it was just, and immediately I'm thinking, that's a great title for a book.
Yeah.
But it's that thing of just observing things, seeing them as they are, which again, we lose that. We lose that sometimes. We have these filters.
We get blinkered. We definitely get. Yeah. I was listening. I dropped the kids off at school today, and I was listening to. I just turned on this random radio station, and it was a local radio station in Vancouver, but it was kind of I think Hindi was the language. And I just left it on. I thought, this is brilliant. I don't understand a word, but it was just so amazing. And I realized just how blinkered we can get when we forget there's entire other ways of communicating, ways of, and different cultures. And, you can very easily forget. I think also, Mark, without going down the rabbit hole with this, but like with COVID, we've all become a lot more antisocial generally, and more used to this isolation. And when that happens, it's easy for us to forget that there's this much bigger world out there, and there's a lot of things that we can forget when we kind of get very myopic, if you like, in the worlds that we've been living. And I think we're all trying to break out of that right now in a very kind of like unruly way in many ways, but it's fascinating. But as a writer, I guess that what I love about the writing aspect is it encourages us to keep thinking about that bigger world and thinking about other cultures and thinking about the ways people do things differently as characters in our stories. It keeps us kind of, it's amazing really, but it really keeps us kind of real in many respects. Whilst we get this kind of closing in and this isolation that so many people have experienced. So one other thing that I thought was interesting that Matt said, I can't think of a writer that we've had on the show who's gone from being the worst ever writer to the best in the world. I think these stories, the way these two stories fitted together, I know, absolutely brilliant. I think it's such a great experience for any writer to hear Matt's story. I mean, as much as we jest about it, but very, very real for him. Like to hear those words, oh, it's the worst
thing they'd ever read.
Like, oh my gosh, like, how do you deal with that? I mean, that makes a 1-star Amazon review seem preferable, doesn't it? It's like, I'll take that over, the worst writer. But the fact that he's written so many books, I think it's a testament to his character that he pushed through from that.
Well, as we've said many times before, you can't please everyone, can you? Yeah. And as Matt said, it probably wasn't intended for him to read because he was going through a mate who had a mate at a publisher or whatever. And it was probably written by someone at the publisher who was kind of young and trying to prove themselves or whatever. Yeah. But that is a swift kick in the nadgers, isn't it? I mean, that is... but I'm sure, though, I don't want to speak for Matt here, but, I've had reviews like that, where people say this is the worst thing ever. Never goes away. Again, you're never going to please everyone. So it has to be water off a duck's back after a while,
It's practicing for pushing it onto them rather than owning it yourself.
Oh, yeah.
It's their world, right? It's
exactly
how they see the world. But it could actually, and the reason why this is really important to focus on is that there are people out in the world that might have got that email with the first thing they ever put out there, and that just killed off their love of writing, and that's a real sadness, because we should never stop doing what we love and what we're passionate about just because somebody else doesn't like it. It's a bit like a classic case, a really, really easy analogy is music. And I always say this to people, like I said, if someone doesn't like your music, I said, that's okay. That's absolutely fine. Because if you actually said to them, like if you were, say you did reggae, for example, and someone said, oh, I can't stand this, it sucks, it's awful. But if you ask them the question, well, what do you like? And they say, well, I like death metal. Then, oh, well, it's bloody obvious. Of course you won't like reggae if you like. And so, we forget that it's actually about taste and it's about people's preferences, and people are allowed to have their preferences. And the world would be a very boring place if everyone only read thrillers, or if everyone feels like everyone only reads thrillers, but do you know what I mean? It'd be a very boring place if people didn't have like all these. I mean, think of Amazon's like sub genres. There's like something for everyone, right? And it's okay. Let's celebrate the diversity. Let's celebrate the fact that people don't like our books. I know it's weird to say this, but let's celebrate the fact, because that means we're allowed to write them for people that do love that type of genre. Because if it were the case that we were all vanilla and we only read one thing, then we couldn't be writers. We couldn't explore what it means to write dinosaur porn or whatever it was. I was listening back to that episode.
That is a deep cut from the past.
Deep cut, folks. If you haven't listened to season 1, you have missed out on so many things. I don't know where that came from. I was listening to I was listening to something from years ago, and it just made me start laughing. I started talking about dinosaur porn, which was a genre or whatever. But so fun stuff. But it's really important to remember, though, isn't it, that Matt, let's talk about his rejection letters, because we've heard this so many times. Successful authors wear rejections as a badge of honor to the point where they display them on their walls. They put them in like photo type albums, and it's about using the power of driving you forward to say, well, I don't agree with you. Thank you for your opinion, but I don't agree with you, rather than feeling rejected and being rejected and owning rejection and stopping writing or stopping believing in yourself as a good writer. Like, Like, let's thank them for their opinion.
Yeah, and with every rejection, you've dodged a bullet because they were the wrong person.
Yeah.
They weren't right for you, and that's fine. That's
Imagine you went
fine.
on a first date with the worst person you could ever imagine living with for the rest of your life, and they didn't like say no thanks, and they just went, yeah, let's do this. Like, what would your life be like? Really? So yeah, you're absolutely right. You've got to just run with it and love it and say, great, I got rejection. Another notch on the bedpost, right?
Okay. Mixed up analogies there, but
yeah. my mixed metaphors are on fire this much. Let's also talk about a saying that I love that Matt said. He said, it takes a village to create a book. And I think that's never truer for an indie author. I mean, very much for a published author, but like when you're being an indie author, you are like the mayor of that village, aren't you? You're the mayor of the town that's having to like corral everyone.
Whatever way you publish, it takes a team. Absolutely takes a team. I mean, Matt, in children's books, when you're going through a traditional publisher, you've got editors and illustrators and designers, and you've got, all kinds of people pitching in, and you've got international publishers and editors as well. But again, if you're self-pubbing, you need to have a good team around you, providing all the, the feedback and perspective and all that kind of thing. Anyone who thinks you're going out there and doing this completely on your own, you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of work. You could be setting yourself up for a very hard time ahead. So embrace the team around you and get them all on board. And I appreciate some of it might cost money, which you might not have, but then we know lots of indie authors who have reciprocal arrangements with beta readers, and alpha readers, and editors, and all that kind of thing. So it's all possible. But it is. This doesn't have to be. The writing can be lonely, but it doesn't mean that the publishing has to be lonely.
Yeah. Now, you've worked in publishing for many, many years. Would you say that the team for a children's writer is probably the largest or most complex compared to, say, the team centered around someone writing a thriller, like an adult thriller?
Possibly. I think the where it gets really complicated is with things like cookery books, because that is a small art, because you have all sorts. You'll have the chef at the center of it, but you also have someone who tests the recipes, photographers, all sorts of other people working on that are designers, and those big full color celebrity chefs books don't puff out of nowhere. That takes that's a real production job. That is. Children's books, I think, because you've got the illustration thing as well, and you've got people with very specific skill sets there contributing to that. Yeah, there is. I think if you've got illustrations involved and finishes and on the cover and things like sound effects on the ebook, all of that stuff is that's a big production number for sure.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's why maybe being an indie children's author is harder to some extent, because you've not, it's not just about finding an editor; it's also about maybe finding an illustrator and going through a number of illustrators until you get the vision. Whereas I think when you go with a traditional publisher, they often will say, my assumption is they say, look, we've got this great illustrator, and they pair you up, and it's like you kind of roll with it. So it's fascinating. So I know there's probably a lot of children's. I think there's a children's book in everyone as well. I've always felt that. I felt no matter what age you are, no matter what you write, I think a lot of people, there's always a children's book. Especially when you become a parent as well, I think that becomes a really strong thing. Like
yes, but don't make the mistake of thinking that it's easy. I think children's books are much harder to write than books for adults. Kids will not take any crap. They can see. They will see through you. I mean,
it's a great equalizer, isn't it? In many ways, I think if you can be a successful children's writer, you can write anything, right? Whereas if you've never written for children, it's a whole other world. And I think as well, people think, it's less words, and it's kind of like watered down, but it's not that, is it? It's like it's like
every word counts. Every word counts. And he was talking about testing the font, testing the layout, the design, the typeface. You've got kids who are, as he said, between the ages of 7 and 11. There's a vast difference reading ability and what they might want from it. And children, some are dyslexic, and again, dyslexic isn't this monolithic thing where it's the same for everyone. It's different for every child. So it's by its very nature, you have to be willing to try out all these different things and experiment with these different ideas when writing for children. It's it's the toughest gig in town, I think.
It is.
I know that writers in every genre and category think they are the worst done by. Because you speak to crime authors, we haven't got romance authors, but I think children's authors probably have more reason to gripe than writers in any other category. And again, we'll come to that in the extended version.
We will. And just to flip that, though, on the counter to that, there's the most reward, I think, as well. When you see a child's eyes light up, or they're talking about a book that's about their favorite writer, I think, there's a huge reward as well. That's why people do it, because, it's incredible to... I don't know why. We're going to talk about Roald Dahl in the extended, but I was thinking about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory today. And just this magical feeling I had when I was reading that book, like the illustrations, and just as a child, like just disappearing into that world. And I just reconnected with that feeling a couple of days ago when I was reading about Roald Dahl in the news. And so let's talk about that in the extended. And if you would like to join us in the extended, we're going to also talk about the challenge of expensive printing, like when are too many pages in your published book. We're going to talk about from writing for children. We're also going to talk about writing for parents or adults too. And we're also going to deep dive on something really important, which is relevant to every single author, whether you're a children's author or otherwise. Who are you trying to please? We're going to jam around that for a while. And then I've got a question for Mark about ebooks and sound effects, because I didn't even realize that was a thing. So Mark's apparently he's going to tell me all about that. So if you're interested in any of that, and just as a mini bonus, by listening to the extended podcast, you are supporting this podcast, which means we can keep doing this and bringing you more of this stuff. So even if it's just to help the podcast out, help us pay for the editors on the show, and keep bringing this to you each week, please subscribe to us. You can do that by going to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And if you're going to join us in the extended, we'll see you on the other side. So welcome to the extended edition, folks, and let's dive straight in. I want to ask you, Mark, very quickly about ebooks and sound effects. This is it's so obvious, but how does it work? I've never read a children's book with noises.
Well, I actually downloaded one of Matt's books with the thing, and it's quite fun because there are little icons on the screen that, depending on what device you've got, you can tap or move a cursor up or whatever, and it makes a particular noise. It's just part of the enhancement of some of the things you can do with ebooks. It's not done a massive amount, I don't think, because no. I think where, as Matt said, children like physical books. They love they're just generally not reading ebooks because even if they have a device, they're using it for gaming. They're not using it to read. But I guess, if you're going on holiday, if you're going away somewhere, it's a great way to carry a whole ton of books that you can read with you, and they can have, these little added extras. I remember in the early days of the ebook revolution, we did experiment a lot with enhanced editions of ebooks. Particularly, we did it with Michael Connolly on a couple of books, and we did it with Joe Abercrombie, which I think Joe mentioned when he was on the show, where he had things like alternate chapters and audio clips of him talking about it. With Michael Connolly, I think we had video clips and maybe interactive maps of Los Angeles, if I recall. The trouble is, no one wanted them. It was a lot of work. It was expensive. Everyone kept comparing them to DVD extras, which again, very few people watch now, except for nerds like me. So there was a novelty factor to it that was expensive, but the readers weren't asking for it. The readers want to read. But I think with kids' books, there is an opportunity to have some fun with it. But again, audio books for kids as well can do that just as well. So I don't know. It's an interesting little. I don't want to use the word gimmick, but it kind of is.
It moves it away from. I hear what you're saying. It moves it away from like the traditional magic of of a book, which is it's just words on a page and you turn the page and you don't have to think about doing other things. I mean, as a parent growing up, I used to have those board books with the little panels down the side with the squares, and you press a button and like toddlers would love that, bird tweeting noise or a horn or whatever. Yeah. They love it. But that was actually a very different experience. Something else that I found interesting now, I don't know if it's just my kids, but I found that I can't get them to read physical books. But we're talking teenagers now. I think we're talking, when we talk about kids love books, we're talking about younger kids, I think.
I don't know.
So I'm doing a sample of one here, but my child cannot. My teen reads Wattpad, and she reads anime stories on Wattpad because she can't get them anywhere else. They're like fan fiction. And that's all she reads. So she's reading loads, which I'm really happy about. But my big challenge with it is it's like the whole blue screen thing, the whole, keeping you awake at night, all the challenges that as parents you have with devices and teens. I mean, we're all very familiar with that. And I would love I'd love nothing more for her to pick up, smell that book, right? Pick up those pages and just, because that's where I'm still at. I'm not a Kindle reader. I will read Kindle if it's the only way to read or it's convenient. But I think I will always be the man with the stack of books on this bedside table.
Well, I think it's if the stuff that she can read is only available on Wattpad, then that's where she's going to read it. And I think that comes down to having an interest in something that's we talked earlier about those sub genres. If you've got an interest in something really specific, it probably is only available digitally. And I think that should be celebrated because, it's a voice that mainstream publishing would have overlooked before. And it's keeping, those readers engaged and excited about it. And I mean, the novel, if you go back to the reason the novel's called a novel is because it was, again, I might be misquoting here, but it was seen as a novelty. It was seen as the downfall of civilization. It was going to be the end of conversation because people always had their bloody nose in a book. And
that's weird though, because that's what everyone says about
exactly
smartphones today.
Each generation begets the woes of the one before. It's this thing where we worry about these things. And as Matt was saying, he doesn't mind if people are reading, even if it's computer games. I mean, my son became obsessed with Red Dead Redemption, which is this game set in the Old West, and super violent, of course. But we would be chatting, and he would just come out with history facts and facts about diseases, and he learned how to play poker, which I'm not sure I approve of, but it expanded his knowledge in ways that if I tried to foist books upon him, and it is the kind of game like The Last of Us that's good storytelling that could end up as a TV show one day and then spin-off novelizations, and then it all comes back to stories, So in the end, it is storytelling in one way or another. If when we were sort of telling stories around campfires, we probably would have added little sound effects, in the way that you have these sound effects on ebooks, and then people around the fire would have said, forget the sound effects, just concentrate on the story.
Do you ever see on social media around Christmas time, people often put a picture up of their family and everyone's sitting on their phones, just looking at their phones, and everyone's like, great Christmas in our house, or there's some kind of like sarky comment around that. I was just wondering, based on what you said, I wonder if there's a photo online. I was actually just looking for it, but I can't find it. I wonder if there's a photo, like an old black and white sepia photo of like a family in a living room all sitting around in like the 1900s reading books. All with their and juxtaposing that with everyone on their phone.
I'm sure I've seen memes like that on social media.
Right?
Sure,
but it's interesting. We forget. We always focus on what's happening today and this is. But like, maybe you're right. Maybe we all just used to sit and read books and not talk. or sat around reading a book together, maybe, if we could only have one book in the family. But it's fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Let's also focus on what Matt was talking about with this idea that the page costs. I know this is like a majorly weird thing that has kind of happened. It's kind of come out of COVID, it feels like, or the the supply chain issue and the increasing costs and inflation and everything that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that before in your publishing career? Did you see that back in the 90s?
It's never been this bad. I think I mentioned on the podcast before, last Easter I was at EasterCon and Marcus Gibbs from Valance was saying, brace yourselves because books are going to go up. Card has gone up, paper has gone up quite drastically. And, Valance that deals in chunky fantasy books are feeling it more than most. So if you like a big chunky fantasy and you like a physical book, it's going to get pretty expensive. So that's some... at Christmas you'd see booksellers sort of raising eyebrows and saying, some of these books are a lot more expensive than they used to be. It's something, to be fair, books haven't gone up with inflation in the way that a lot of other things have. Books, you'll still see brand new hardcover books on sale for $16.99 or $18.99. And that's usually an attempt to grab market share by giving it good value for money.
Yeah.
So they are going up, and there is, a friend of mine who I saw only a couple of weeks ago, who works for a publisher, was saying that the issues with paper availability, they're having to book it months in advance. And now, we're in February now. They will have some idea of what their big Christmas books are, and they'll be booking paper, ordering paper now in anticipation of that. So which is why if very often if a book goes into reprint, so that's a big Christmas book, and it sells out around about October, you probably won't get a reprint before Christmas because they won't have the time to get the paper in and turn it around. And if it's a full color one, in the UK at least, we don't have a proper full color printing that gives the cost benefits that if you want full color, again, those cookery books that we talked about, they're printed in Spain, Italy, China, so that's where you get that's where it's most cost effective to do it, and that takes weeks to get them over here.
It's fascinating, isn't it? One of the big gripes right now, I think it's everywhere, but I'm reading a lot about it in Canada, is how supermarkets, grocery stores are basically gouging the consumer by over increasing prices. They take inflation and they're all making billions of dollars of profit. Now, obviously I think that's awful, but I'm just wondering, thinking about this price thing that's happening with books, especially hardbacks, I actually feel quite hopeful about it, because I think that if people get used to paying a higher price for a hardback book and a paperback book, if and when, and that's a big if, prices eventually do come down a bit and they settle a bit, maybe we can keep the prices of those books high. Because one of my bugbears, this, Mark, I've talked about this many times on the podcast, is that I think books are ridiculously cheap and they shouldn't be priced at like a couple of dollars, and the same with ebooks. But there's a caveat I'm saying with all this. If that helps increase the value that people are willing to invest in a book, that can only be good for the author, as long as the extra profit or the more money goes to the author's pocket and not the publishers.
Yes.
Right? Because I think in the traditional publishing world, and forgive me, publishers listening to this, I know we have many of you guys on there, you have to make money. You're in a business, and I totally get it. I totally understand it. But I would love to see a publisher come out and say, look, we are recognizing that prices for books should be higher, but we're keeping them high because we're passing that value on to the author, because we think the author is not making or being rewarded for what they're creating. And I think that can only be good for people who write the books.
Percentage wise, the author will still get the percentage. And of course, if the received price, because most royalties are paid on received price. So if a book is half price, they get the percentage based on that. Then the author still gets that increase. But publishing deals still pretty much suck right across the board. They're really not good. They're not, they need a big rethink, a very, very big rethink.
Interesting. But it's also partly reflective on what's been happening in the industry as well. 20, 30 years ago, they didn't have indie authors competing with them. And it's all this big, weird machine that's having to constantly shift and change. But it is an interesting thing, and it's definitely worth considering if you are especially if you're thinking of doing a Kickstarter campaign as an indie author or something like that, where you're going to be like, oh, don't lose money on it. Like, do your research, find out how long it takes to get the book printed. Like Mark was saying, like if you're going to say, right, we're going to deliver you our book, when we hit our target, well, it might take a few more months than you expect. So we're living in weird times right now, very much so. So just be aware of that. Now, Mark, I know a lot of people are probably listening to this extended saying, when are you going to talk about Roald Dahl? He's one of the favorite authors of many of us. He's one of my favorite authors when I was growing up. And even now, to be honest, I still think he's incredible. But there's been a lot of interesting discussion in the news. We both were talking about this, weren't we? About brand values around some of these.
Well, let's start at the beginning, because there have been lots of stories in the press this week. Journalists, as is their wont, getting their knickers in a twist, saying publishers are censoring Roald Dahl by updating his books and changing some of the words. And it's true, publishers have been doing it. They've been making fairly small changes. So they've cut the word fat from the descriptions of some characters. They've made the Oompa Loompas, they call them small, they changed small men to small people. So, a bit of diversity in the Oompa Loompa world. And people have gone completely swivel-eyed over this, censoring, blah, blah, blah. But these people have very, very short memories, because this isn't the first time this has happened. Far from the first time this has happened. I mean, the original Oompa Loompas in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory were originally black pygmies. Massively offensive, but interestingly, they were changed by who? By Dahl himself. Roald Dahl made that change. He was approached by an organization called the National Association of Advancement of Colored People in the States, and he listened to them and he made those changes. Apparently, as well, I found this out today, apparently Charlie in the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was written as a black boy, but his agent talked him out of it. Wow. He didn't think the world was ready for a young black boy as a hero of a Roald Dahl book. So yeah.
When was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory written? Was it like
early? Bear one moment, caller. I'll just check with you.
Is it? I'm guessing 70s.
No, it's before then.
Before then.
Yeah. Because the film was 1971.
Oh, okay.
The book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was published in 1964.
Ah.
Yeah. So, this is not...
Different time as well, when you think about it.
Yeah. Very different time. And so this is... And the same thing happened with Enid Blyton. They changed the wording in a lot of Enid Blyton books.
Noddy.
Yeah.
I remember was a big one, wasn't it? Which we
exactly. Yeah. Lots and lots of changes. But now, why are publishers doing this? Publishers are saying it's because they want to have inclusive language in these books, which is, admirable. But the real reason they're doing it is because they make a ton of money out of these dead authors, because they are huge brands. Because as Matt was saying, the parents in the shop were looking at the display and they said, "We've heard of him. Let's get that." That's the buying decision. This is the cold trickle of horror that every children's author who's not on those shelves is thinking, "Oh, great, we've heard of him, let's get that." That's the buying decision. So the publishers are aware of that, but they also know that if they don't update these books, the parents who were in their, are the millennial generation, are becoming parents now, and they are going to be far less tolerant of some of the, frankly, quite iffy stuff in those Roald Dahl, Enid Blyton books. So what do you do? Do you leave these books and brands to die and fade away? Or do you think, no, we need growth, we need increased sales every year, so let's change the books? So, yeah, that's why it's happening. It's all to do with filthy lucre in the end. It's all to do with the brand and the fact that they can go to supermarkets and WH Smiths and the big chains and say, "Listen, let's have another huge drop, and we've made some changes. The books are, the essence of the books are the same, but we've changed a few words." And that's why it's been done. So this whole conversation about censorship, blah, 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 is a complete distraction, because it's been done before and it will be done again. Because these big brands, I mean, personally, I think they should be left alone and left to die. And then new authors will come through and new brands will evolve. But publishers are becoming less and less good at that, sadly.
I think
that's my 2 pence.
I think, well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I also think I have mixed feelings about it. I think, having grown up with Roald Dahl books, and they were a different time, and I think it's okay to kind of edit them for modern day languages and sensibilities, which is really important. But I think also, is there a risk that as you start to erode over time, and there's small changes, but over time they may add up to actually losing what made that particular book, that book was. And I think there's also, we need to get into a conversation in society where we're talking about preserving things because they're points in time, they're time capsules, and they're useful from a historical perspective to say, and this is how children's authors used to speak back in the 70s and that's a value. And the minute we start removing that, we're forgetting the past, and we're forgetting actually how we've progressed in what we're doing. And so I think I'm really mixed. I don't know where I sit with this one, because on the one hand, I think there's so much value in preserving things. And like you say, I mean, you look at someone like David Walliams, like he is the modern day Roald Dahl. I mean, that's the moniker that they started to kind of put on his books. And they were going for that market. They were thinking, probably thinking, maybe they were thinking at the time, hey, it's time for a new Roald Dahl, because Roald Dahl's going to be coming a little bit, his language is outdated, and it's going to be unpolitically.
Williams is arguably more problematic than Roald Dahl, frankly. Yeah.
That's what I was saying. Like, what would be, I'd love to have sat in the meetings. And if anyone doesn't know who David Walliams is, you've got to check out, okay, if you want to understand where we're coming from, if you're not from the UK or you're not into like British comedy, go and watch episode 1 of a show called Little Britain, which is a David Walliams show, which is what he did before he became a children's author. I mean, he's still a comedian, I believe, and more a game, like a TV host on X Factor or something now, isn't he? But I sat down with someone for the first time a couple of months ago and watched Little Britain with them, and they'd never seen it before. And I don't know how old it is now. It's going back a few years, isn't it? But it's still on the streaming platforms. And I thought to myself, how do you take as a publisher? How do you take a guy who's like, they're so over the line and so over the edge, and convert that into a children's author? Like, what would have been some of the editorial discussions that they had in the rooms with some of his original material? As I said, no, David, you can't get away with that. I bet there's a ton of stuff.
Little Britain is 20 years old this year.
That's crazy. That still doesn't feel old.
Yeah.
But Roald Dahl was never that kind of like edgy like adult comedian.
No. He did. He wrote for adults. He wrote. He did. He wrote short stories and novels.
Some amazing stories. Yeah.
So he did have that side to him. But yeah, I think the whole thing about censorship is a bit of a distraction, because it is ultimately in the end about a publisher having a big brand and wanting to squeeze that for all they possibly can, and keep making money from it. And they would say increasing the lifespan of that brand, right? It's like, but also it's fascinating. Dead author. So it's the author. It's the author doesn't answer back.
Although now we're not even going to go down it, Mark. But I'm just going to drop this one and run. Eventually, who knows what AI can do in terms of writing in the style of an author? Boy. I know, right? I mean, it's happening in music, it's happening in film. Dying does not mean the end of your business. It appears now, but we won't go there. We'll save that for another episode, because
just to say very quickly, rabbit hole. I mean, just to say this week, Clarkesworld, and I think one other, Clarkesworld is great science fiction magazine, anthologies, of short stories. They had to shut down submissions this week because they were deluged with thousands of
oh my god,
AI short stories, because people thought they could make a quick buck because they pay by the word, these short stories. Can I just say, I told you so. I said this a few weeks ago, that the likes of Kindle are going to be, people are going to be trying to make a quick buck from Drek made with AI. But the fact that Clarkesworld and those people were able to say, this isn't real, immediately it isn't real. So, people are going to have to start thinking about how they filter that Drek out. And,
it's a crazy world, isn't it? We will delve big time. I'm fascinated by that world. Let's finish up by talking about who we're writing for, who we're trying to please, because this was the big thing that Matt Brown talked about in the interview about. And it was, I love the fact that the two of you concluded that, well, you're actually ultimately first and foremost writing for yourself. And I think it's quite easy to forget that, especially if you're a children's author, because you're thinking, you know, I'm writing for these children. But if you've got that inner child in you, you can still write for yourself, even if it's children's fiction. But
if you're writing for that inner child, then write for that inner child. I think he made the interesting analogy of Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon's mantra was, what do the kids want? Let's not think what the adults want. We're not here to please the adults. Even though the adults say, we've heard of him, let's get that. They make the buying decision. You want to make the kids happy. And it's interesting because I'm sure, you know, we're of a certain age. There would have been, you know, you watch like TV. So Blue Peter, I always felt was made for adults, but Tiswas was made for kids. You know, Blue Peter was very prim and proper and using sticky back plastic, and it was all very, you know, whereas Tiswas was putting goo over, you know, the heads of celebrities and having punk bands
Pies,
on, and the Phantom Flan Flinger,
the Flan Flinger,
and Sally James. So you know, you had something, you know, that Blue Peter was trying to please, I think, you know, grown-ups.
Blue Peter was very BBC in the 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas Tiswas was very ITV.
And of course, you know, Matt was talking about the young ones as well, which has that kind of anarchic Bash Street Kids quality about it too. And when you get into that childish point of view, again, coming back to my great nephew, he was playing with little Lego figures and he was doing things like he was going, oh, you're under arrest. Oh, he's killed him. Oh, you're going to jail. You know, which some of the adults were kind of, oh gosh, should we be worried? I'm like, no, this is exactly what I was like. He's got an imagination. Yeah. He is creating worlds and he's creating rules within those worlds. And there's good and there's evil, there's bad and there's, you know, there's injustice and there's little wars going on and people go to jail, you know, for doing bad things. He's learning that, you know, so this is terrific. This is what it is to tap into a childlike mind. Whereas adults, we start to fret and worry about these things. So I think, you know, Matt clearly is, you know, tapped into that completely with that, you know, the fact that he came up with an idea for a kid who invents a time machine out of a mouldy sandwich. I know. Brilliant. Genius. I challenge anyone listening to this to come up with a better idea, you know, for a kid's book series. I know. But that's because I think of his mindset and the fact that he's in arrested development.
Totally. And I think, and then the other thing is, I think it's easy to forget when we're writing for a different audience to ourselves, like writing for children. It's easy to forget that the process of writing is a very long and sometimes often an arduous journey. So if we aren't including ourselves as the person that we're writing for, we're missing out on an opportunity of really enjoying that process and having fun. If we make ourselves laugh within that journey, then it makes it so much more pleasurable to write. And I think I've seen so many people get lost in this world of the writing pain. It's like there's such a heaviness around writing with some people where they're so like stuck down in the pit of despair with writing. And sometimes it's, like I said before, I think I said last week, it's about rediscovering the joy of writing. And that might mean taking a step back and saying, write for yourself and enjoy what you're writing. Enjoy it, love it, have fun. Don't take yourself too seriously. You know, write serious books, absolutely, and write about serious things. But at the same time, try not to get trapped in this pit of writing despair, which so many people like create an identity around.
Absolutely. I think it comes back to this thing of censorship as well. I'm wondering what other people are going to think, starting with agents and editors.
Yes.
You're thinking, what are publishers looking for? I need to write that.
Yeah.
I need to write what publishers are looking for. Then they'll love me. Then they'll accept me and accept me into their club. But actually, the irony is, if you write without fear, if you write without that filter, whatever you're writing, be it thrillers or science fiction or fantasy or romance or whatever it is, or children's books, if you write without fear and you write without a filter, your voice is much more likely to come through. And that's what they're looking for, that's unique voice.
And they'll tell you then in the post deal meeting where you've signed the contract, right? So there's a few things I think we need to kind of pull back on a bit. But the fact is that you've got to stand out from the crowd. Don't be vanilla. Don't pre-censor yourself when you write, allow them to tell you. You just write what is who you are.
Yeah, I mean, they'll tell what they'll also tell you is we loved your voice. We thought it was unique. That's the first thing they'll tell you, and then comes the negotiation. As Matt said, his first draft he goes a little over the top with the jokes. The joke about the boy getting the letter.
I love that.
Thought he was pregnant. I'm so sorry that went out. That is such a funny joke. But he says, you chuck enough stuff, then some of it's going to get through. Yeah. So again, he's writing there without fear. He's just putting it all out there, and then comes a negotiation where, okay, let's maybe remove that. Let's put that back in.
And if you're self-publishing, I promise you, some portion of your readers will also tell you they will be and then you have to decide. And then you have to decide whether you think actually they've got a point, and maybe I should pull it back a bit, or you say no, actually that's who I am, and you say I'm quite happy to lose that reader if that's how they feel about things. So it's
if someone like Roald Dahl, who was notoriously grumpy and again very problematic, he's on record as being quite anti-Semitic, as well, and making some very. But if someone like Roald Dahl can listen to the National Association of Advancement of Colour People and go, actually, you're right, I'm going to change that, then you can listen to that kind of feedback as well. Exactly. But again, first draft, write without fear. Get it all out there. Don't try and second guess what other people are wanting or going to be offended by or are going to be upset by, because you'll end up pleasing no one then.
Brilliant stuff. So, folks, thank you for joining us in this extended. We have gone around the world and back in not even half an hour, but we really appreciate your support. We always say this. It means the world to me and Mark that you're willing to support this podcast. So thank you so much. And in addition to that, we really would love to ask you to tell your friends about these extended editions if you find them useful. Tell your friends, if you're listening to this in the Academy, which I know a lot of people are, tell your friends about the Academy, get them to come and check it out, and bring them into the family. This is like such an incredible journey. The more the merrier, absolutely. Well, if you've just skipped the extended, you've missed out on a very interesting discussion. Oh my gosh, Roald Dahl. Yeah, if you've got any interest in children's books, if you've got interest about censorship, if you've got interest about making sounds with ebooks, the cost of producing books, we've just covered it all in like about 30-40 minutes. So do join the extended. But Mark, let's dive in. What's been happening on social media this week?
Got some lovely stuff on social media this week. So Steve Gowland, who's a member of the BXP team on Facebook and a long-time supporter of the podcast, because every weekend, every Sunday, we have a little roundup of what have you been doing, what you got coming up next week. And Steve said, I've been busy. He said 8,372 words in a little over a week and had huge fun writing today. The most enjoyable thing is I have 2 new fictional characters added to the story, a pair of shopkeepers, both called Mark. Yes, you guessed it. In the next big writing trend for 2023, exclusive to the BXP community, the 2 Marks, Stay and DeVoe, are living, breathing characters in my latest book. I can't tell you what part they play, but they appear in Chapter 5, imaginatively titled The Great Bollocking. And it's like a game of bestseller experiment, Easter eggs, and bingo. The book is called Delusions and Dragons and won't be out until May, so you'll have to wait till then. I wonder what they'll do next. Well, Steve, our lawyers are on standby. That's all I'm saying.
No, I say go for it. I think it's brilliant. Is this the first time we've ever been actually fictionalized in a book? I know we've had characters based on us. I remember I was the hunk, wasn't I? I was the romance. Do you remember that in the romance novel? I was really chuffed with that. I was like, but I think this is the first time we've actually been fully blatantly fictionalized and bring it on. I think that's brilliant. This should become a thing. Every listener of the bestseller experiment, you've got to somehow drop a bestselling experiment or 2 Marks kind of reference Easter egg in your book. You did it in your movie, Mark. I was in stitches. You'd said to me something about, here I'm sitting in Leicester Square, folks, watching the premiere, opening night of Unwelcome, the movie. Absolutely excited as anything to be watching this film that's finally come out. It's like a proper movie. It's not even like some ropey old indie movie that's been. This is like proper movie soundtrack, drone footage of Ireland, amazing cast, apart from one, and absolutely brilliant people. And Mark has dropped in
no spoilers.
What?
No spoilers.
No,
spoilers.
I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm saying to people, if you love this podcast, you have to go and watch this movie, because there was moments, Mark, where I was bursting out laughing and people were looking at me going,
Yeah.
Why did he find that funny? And I just thought, I can't believe that you've communicated to me sitting there in this cinema, in this big movie. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. No spoilers, but if you love this podcast, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, and I'm talking like more than a few weeks, basically, and you've got to know who we are in our characters, go see the movie and see how many you can spot. That's all I'm going to say. Absolutely brilliant.
I'm amazed I got some of those through, actually.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely hilarious.
And then we've got a lovely bit of news from Tanya Scott, who in the same roundup said, when you're genuinely so busy, you forgot to announce a new book out this week. So her new book is The Invisible Woman, which is the Wronged Women's Cooperative. And it's the book 2 in that series, which is just fantastic. And it's 2 unidentified bodies, one from 20 years ago, one from today, both buried in the same place. Who is responsible? And that's under the name T.E. Scott. So congrats on putting that out there. It's absolutely brilliant, Tanya. Congratulations. And then, well, we got a poetry corner moment, haven't we? We had an email because you asked for poems, didn't you?
I did ask for poems, yeah.
And I was dismissively saying, well, it's difficult to become a bestseller if to be a poet. It's really, really hard. So Sarah Zyman got in touch, and her poem, Rumours, has been highly commended in the Caterpillar Poetry Prize, which is wonderful news. But it just seemed perfect with Matt's episode this week with children's fiction and Roald Dahl and everything. So Sarah sent us this poem, and she's given us permission to read it out on the podcast, and this is just wonderful. So this is Rumours by Sarah Zyman. They're crossing our class from the front to the back. I heard it from Amit. He heard it from Jack. He heard it from Martha, who then told Shanice, who told it to Patience, best friends with Patrice. Patrice then told Hannah, who said to Adele, the storks paid a visit to Mrs. Patel. I wondered to Eddie, a stork has been seen? Is that like a heron? But what does it mean? Eddie just shrugged and whispered to Jake, who then told the lunch queue, it's not a mistake. You can ask anyone. That's what I heard. Poor Mrs. P was attacked by a bird. What bird? An eagle? Could it be her pet? I heard a crocodile. I saw the vet. She fought off a tiger. I heard she bought 3. I know the story. No, listen to me. Everyone shouting a hullabaloo. Mrs. Patel left to open a zoo. A laugh from our teacher. Her name is Miss Trent, and she came to teach us when Mrs. P went. Good heavens, children, what is it you've heard? Fighting with tigers attacked by a bird? There's no need for worry, no cause for alarm. Her baby arrived. She's come to no harm. A lovely, sweet baby, no claws and no beak. Delivered quite safely the end of last week. Let's clear up these rumours and make lovely cards to send our good wishes and fondest regards. Delivered, mused Martha, and here in no time. The baby was ordered from Amazon Prime. Her name is Alexa. My aunt saw the van. Well, my uncle knows the delivery man. Brilliant. Sarah, that is absolutely fantastic.
I love that.
If you want more of Sarah's poetry, which is just absolutely delightful, do check out her website, sarahzyman.co.uk. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can check that out. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
That was absolutely brilliant. That made
great
my
way
day.
to end the podcast. It's fantastic.
Great way. Absolutely, folks. So, folks, thank you so much. And if you would like to get in contact with us, there's many different ways, which Mark is going to tell us.
Yes, okay. You can go to bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. That's how Sarah got in touch with us. You can go to Facebook, which is Bestseller Experiment, or Twitter and Instagram is @bestsellerxp. And if you've enjoyed the show, subscribe, rate, give us a review, tell your friends, stop random people in the street, anything that will get people listening. And thank you. And thank you as always to our editors, Dave and JD.
Absolutely. And if you would like to create the habit of a lifetime, don't forget the 200-word challenge. Sarah actually told us that the 200-word challenge has been a massive help to her in terms of getting her focusing on her writing as well. So great to hear that feedback as well. So join the merry band of many, many, many people who are currently banking their words every day. And you can do that by going to 200wordchallenge.com, 200wordchallenge.com. And we always say this, but if you'd like to join Mark and I in the Academy and have us as your coaches, then pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com to find out more. Mr. Stay, a very happy birthday week for you, a very happy 50th year for you, or 51st year. That's always the bit that throws me. You're actually already done the 50th year. I know, right? But very happy returns, many, many more trips around the sun to you and to everyone else.
What does many happy returns mean?
Returns around the sun is a year.
Is it?
Yeah, apparently. When I heard about it, I thought, interesting.
See,
someone
I
will
worked in
correct us
publishing.
if it's wrong.
Returns are a bad thing. Returns are when the books don't sell.
They're never happy returns.
They go back to be pulped.
Smoke damaged, or they haven't sold. But if you are having a birthday this week, a very happy birthday to you. And if you've just had a birthday as well, congratulations. And embrace that year, that extra year that you've now got to enjoy and celebrate life. And thank you so much for celebrating life with us on this podcast. And until next week, folks, it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Bye.